Jasmine Crockett calls. Trump supporters mentally ill. Karoline Leavitt strikes back live on air. It started with a leaked audio clip. At a closed-door policy event in Houston, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, known for her bold style and rising status in progressive circles, stood before a crowd of political donors and organizers. Her words were confident, unfiltered. They support him no matter what. And honestly, some of these Trump supporters, they're mentally unstable. That sentence echoed far beyond the ballroom. Within hours, the recording hit social media. Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, millions heard it. And the reaction was immediate. Conservative voices erupted. Commentators, veterans, working moms, retired cops. People from all walks of life felt attacked, demeaned, written off by a sitting member of Congress. It wasn't just political anymore. It felt personal. Among them was Karoline Leavitt. The next morning, Karoline stepped in front of the cameras, not to apologize, not to deflect, but to respond. With precision, with clarity, with fire. This isn't about party lines anymore, she said. This is about dignity, about respect, about not letting millions of Americans be dismissed just because they dare to think differently. And with that, the real showdown began. It started with a leaked audio clip. The setting was a closed-door policy retreat in Houston, Texas. A sleek hotel ballroom, velvet-draped walls, filtered lights, quiet chatter among donors and party loyalists. It wasn't meant for public consumption, but someone had pressed record. At the front of the room, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, one of the fastest rising stars in the Democratic Party, stood at the podium. Her tone was fiery, her confidence unmistakable. Known for her unapologetic views and growing following among younger progressives, Crockett had made a career of challenging Republican narratives. But this time, the challenge struck a different chord. They support him no matter what she said. And honestly, some of these Trump supporters, they're mentally unstable. I'm not even joking. It was a throwaway line. A moment of off-script frankness in a room where people nodded, some even chuckled. But the microphone had caught every word, and the person holding the recording knew exactly what they had. The clip surfaced late that evening on a low-profile X account. It was only 14 seconds long, but it didn't need to be any longer. The words were clear. The tone was dismissive. The implications explosive. Within hours, conservative influencers seized on the clip. Headlines began rolling out. Crockett calls, Trump voters mentally unstable, Democrat starlet insults, 75 million Americans proof. They think we're crazy. On TikTok, reaction videos multiplied. On Reddit, threads dissected the context. On YouTube, political channels flooded feeds with thumbnails screaming outrage. But none of them matched the momentum of what came next. Karoline Leavitt was already on the rise. A conservative firebrand in her own right, she had made headlines with her sharp commentary and unwavering defense of what she called the America First heartland. When the audio surfaced, her team wasted no time. That morning, she walked into the studios of America First Tonight. The lighting already warm, cameras humming. She didn't wait for introductions. Good morning, America. I know you've seen the clip. I know you heard what Jasmine Crockett said. And if you haven't yet, you should. Because this is not just another moment of political theater. This is personal. Her voice was calm, controlled, but there was a spark underneath. Let me be very clear, she said. I know Trump supporters. I was raised by one. I worked alongside them. I represent them. They are not mentally ill. They are not dangerous. They are not unstable. They are patriots, veterans, nurses, teachers, small business owners, the people who keep this country alive. Clips of her rebuttal spread like wildfire. Unlike some who had tried to spin or soften Crockett's remarks, Karoline leaned in. She refused to let the comment slide. And in doing so, she tapped into something raw. The divide wasn't just political anymore. It had become cultural, emotional, moral. For millions who felt ignored or ridiculed by coastal elites, Karoline's words struck deep. Mainstream outlets tried to contextualize the clip, noting that Crockett had later clarified her words were directed at extremist elements, not all Trump voters, but the damage was done. The image had been painted a rising Democratic leader, labeling a swath of the country as mentally unfit. Karoline meanwhile doubled down, not with rage but with story. My uncle served 2 tours in Afghanistan, she shared in an Instagram live that same day. He's a Trump supporter. He believes in strong borders and safe streets. Are we calling him unstable now because he wants the country he fought for to be protected? Comments flooded in, stories, frustrations. People who had felt voiceless now felt heard. The next day, Karoline was booked across conservative media. Fox, Newsmax, podcasts, even mainstream hosts couldn't ignore the moment. And just like that, a 14-second clip had turned into a national flashpoint. But Karoline wasn't done. Behind the scenes, her team prepared for a direct debate. If Crockett was willing, Karoline would meet her on neutral ground, on camera, live. The stage was being set. Emails were exchanged. Producers from multiple networks vied to host the clash. Online petitions called for a town hall. Political analysts weighed in, with anticipation predicting fireworks, ideological trench warfare, or even a potential pivot point in the election cycle. Karoline continued to press forward. "I'm not afraid to sit across from her," she said, in an appearance on Morning Wire. "But let's make one thing clear. This isn't about Jasmine Crockett. This is about the idea that tens of millions of people, good, honest, hardworking Americans, can be smeared with one sentence and we're supposed to shrug it off. Not on my watch." The sentiment resonated. Town hall meetings in Missouri, Ohio, and West Virginia echoed her words. At one rally, a veteran stood up during the Q&A and said, "My PTSD doesn't make me unstable. It makes me a survivor, and I vote Republican." The crowd applauded for a full minute. Journalists started calling it the Crockett clip effect. In polling data, a measurable shift appeared. Independent voters, especially in swing counties, showed increased concern over media tone, political elitism, and cultural dismissal. Jasmine Crockett responded with her own statement. "I regret if my words were taken out of context. I was referring specifically to violent extremists, the ones who storm the Capitol, who post threats online, who radicalize others. Not everyday citizens. That's not who I am." But the apology didn't stick. The phrase, "if my words were taken out of context," became a punchline across right-wing broadcasts. Karoline took it one step further. "This is exactly the problem," she said. "The left gets to paint a whole group of people as dangerous, then walk it back like it's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. You don't get to insult someone's grandmother, then say you meant someone else's cousin." The clip of that line alone hit 4 million views in 48 hours. And so the battle lines were drawn, not between 2 women, but between 2 visions of America. One defined by defiance, tradition, and pride, the other by progressive ambition, blunt honesty, and elite assumption. Somewhere between the two stood the rest of the country, watching, waiting, deciding. The countdown to their face-off had begun. The debate was scheduled for Friday evening, nationally televised, a neutral venue in Atlanta, moderated by an anchor known for his direct style and refusal to let either side run wild. The stage was minimalist: 2 podiums, a centered moderator's desk, a studio audience carefully vetted to ensure balance. By Thursday, both campaigns had launched digital counters, Countdown to the Truth. Karoline vs. Crockett trended for 36 hours straight. Opinion columns bloomed across political blogs. Pundits labeled it a clash of generations, ideologies, and cultures. Karoline's team called it the moment working America gets a voice back. Jasmine's camp labeled it a teachable moment for a divided nation. On the day of the debate, the streets outside the venue swelled with protesters and supporters alike. Handmade signs bobbed in the crowd. "Truth isn't hate, I'm a nurse, not mentally ill, let her speak." "We've had enough." Inside, Karoline prepared in silence. Surrounded by advisors, she reviewed talking points, not for memorization, but to sharpen her instinct. She had done dozens of interviews, but this was different. This was live, no edits, no second takes. She chose to wear navy blue, no jewelry, but a thin cross pendant that once belonged to her grandmother. In the opposite dressing room, Jasmine adjusted her blazer. Her team moved quickly around her, adjusting mics, confirming final notes. She looked calm but focused. This wasn't her first debate, but it was her most visible. Her words had started a fire, and now she'd have to walk through it. When the cameras rolled, the studio quieted. The moderator opened. Tonight, two leaders meet, not just to debate politics, but to represent two very different understandings of America's heart. Let's begin. First question. Congresswoman Crockett, what do you say to the millions who feel dismissed by your recent comment? Jasmine breathed deeply. I've said from the start that my words were about extremists, about those who refuse democratic norms, not everyday voters. But I do think we need to talk about the kind of language and loyalty that normalizes dangerous behavior. Karoline nodded slightly. Then she spoke. With all due respect, Congresswoman, you didn't say extremists. You said Trump supporters. That's my dad. That's my neighbor. That's the school bus driver in Ohio who volunteers at the food bank. You don't get to insult 75 million people, then narrow it later because the blowback is inconvenient. The room tensed. The moderator turned to Karoline. And do you believe any of the current rhetoric on the right contributes to instability or violence? Karoline looked directly at the camera. I believe in personal responsibility. I also believe in leadership that doesn't start by labeling half the country. You want to talk about unity. It starts with respect. We don't build bridges by mocking the people we're trying to reach. Applause broke out from half the room. Jasmine waited, then leaned forward. What I find concerning, she said, is that you frame every critique as an attack. We're allowed to critique behavior, ideologies, and patterns. That's democracy. What's not okay is pretending every call for accountability is elitist. Some things deserve scrutiny. Karoline tilted her head. I agree. But scrutiny isn't a slur. You didn't scrutinize, you dismissed. You generalized. You made the kind of comment that if a conservative said it about any protected group, they'd be canceled by morning. Gasps, murmurs, the moderator intervened. We'll take a break. As the screen faded to black, both women looked straight ahead. Neither blinked. The next round would be even sharper. During the commercial break, viewers saw split-screen live feeds of the two women in silence. The atmosphere on social media grew electric. On TikTok, creators stitched reactions in real time. On cable, commentators began scrambling to prepare updated talking points. In diners and bars, viewers argued. Then came round two. Moderator, let's address the role of media. Do you believe media narratives are contributing to division in this country? Karoline went first. Yes. I believe many media outlets fuel division not because they're evil, but because outrage sells. But what's more dangerous is when leaders give them the ammunition by saying things that reduce millions of citizens to caricatures. That's not journalism's fault. That's leadership's failure. Jasmine's eyes narrowed slightly. I believe media is a mirror. Sometimes distorted, but mostly reactive. When people feel targeted, we must ask why they feel implicated. Maybe the media is shining a light we don't want to face. Karoline responded swiftly. Or maybe the light is being pointed by people with a political flashlight, and they're only illuminating what fits the story they already want to tell. The moderator smiled slightly at the intensity. Jasmine leaned in. You speak of rural workers, of veterans, of everyday Americans, and I respect that. But let's not pretend Trumpism didn't empower conspiracy racism and denial of democracy. Can we separate that from the patriots you champion? Karoline didn't flinch. Are there extremists? Yes. And we denounce them. But let's not pretend the left is pure. Summer riots, cancel culture, suppressing dissent under the guise of safety. Extremism doesn't wear a single color, and millions of Americans who voted for Trump did so not for chaos, but because they wanted their country back. The audience rumbled. The moderator glanced at his notes, then said, Final segment. What would healing look like to each of you? Jasmine softened her voice. Healing means listening, even to people we don't agree with. But it also means calling out dangerous rhetoric because silence isn't neutral. It's complicity. Karoline looked straight at the camera again. Healing means humility. It means knowing you don't know the life of the truck driver in Iowa or the single mom in Detroit. It means disagreeing without dehumanizing. And above all, it means leaders who don't talk down to the people they claim to serve. Applause. The debate ended, but the conversation was just beginning. Outside, the crowd had grown. Inside, phones lit up. Clips were already being uploaded, reactions forming, hashtags evolving. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a debate. It was a turning point. The morning after the debate, America woke up divided but awake. The clips had already gone viral. Karoline's line, "You don't get to insult 75 million people, then narrow it later because the blowback is inconvenient," was now a soundbite used on every major conservative show. Jasmine's phrase, "Silence isn't neutral," its complicity was being quoted across progressive platforms. Cable news ran wall-to-wall panels. Pundits leaned into their biases. Some called it the most consequential debate since Nixon-Kennedy. Others labeled it a media circus with no winner-only exposure. But in small towns and big cities, at kitchen tables and job sites, in Uber rides and classrooms, people were talking. People who hadn't watched debates in years were re-watching this one. Teens on TikTok were stitching clips. Grandparents were emailing YouTube links. Suburban moms discussed it in PTA groups. Voters who'd checked out were suddenly checking back in. Karoline flew to Ohio the next day. At a rally in Columbus, she stood on a flatbed truck with American flags draped behind her. It wasn't scripted. "They say I'm angry," she said. "Well, I am. Angry that the people who work the hardest are the ones mocked the loudest. Angry that patriotism is now treated like a punchline. But I'm also hopeful, because last night America saw us, heard us, and they didn't flinch." The crowd roared. Veterans saluted. Young women held up signs that read, "Karoline Twice Courage." Meanwhile, Jasmine held a press event in Chicago. The tone was more subdued. She focused on nuance. "I stand by the need for accountability," she said. "But I also want to listen more. Not to extremists, but to Americans who feel unseen. And if this moment helps us hear each other louder than the noise, then it's worth it." The press was skeptical. Some framed it as damage control. Others praised the self-awareness. But it didn't matter. The battle lines had shifted. In the days that followed, pollsters released numbers. Karoline's name recognition surged 18 points nationally. Swing state independents leaned more favorably toward her. Jasmine retained her base, but fence-sitters began asking tougher questions. Focus groups lit up with new sentiment. A voter in Pennsylvania said, "I don't agree with everything Karoline says, but she's real. She didn't dance around anything." A black mother in Georgia told a podcast, "I like Jasmine's fire." But this time, she got too comfortable speaking for all of us. Karoline's team, sensing momentum, released a 3-minute digital ad titled "Not Forgotten." It featured working-class families, old photos of service members, and footage from the debate. The final shot, Karoline staring into the camera. The caption read, "We're done being quiet." It hit 20 million views in 3 days. Meanwhile, late-night comedians couldn't resist. They mocked both women, Karoline for her Iowa truck driver line, Jasmine for trying to thread a needle that had already torn, but neither camp cared. The moment had passed. The movement had started. Strategists on both sides began recalculating. If 2 women could create this much noise, maybe the old rules no longer applied. Maybe the electorate was hungrier for unvarnished truth than polished civility. And maybe, just maybe, the road to 2026 and 2028 had been reshaped by one debate, one insult, and 2 women who didn't blink. In the following week, the ripple effects continued. Karoline was invited to speak at a town hall in Michigan, where union workers and small business owners gave her a standing ovation. She didn't mention Jasmine by name. Instead, she talked about forgotten towns, crumbling infrastructure, and the dignity of labor. It was a speech that reached beyond party lines. Jasmine returned to the House floor with renewed intensity, introducing a bill focused on digital transparency and countering misinformation, an indirect nod to the way her comment had spiraled. Her speech was sharp-measured. Some clapped, others whispered. In digital circles, parody videos and remix memes surfaced blending both women's quotes into satirical mashups. But amidst the noise, a trend was emerging. Audiences weren't just laughing, they were thinking. Podcasts titled The Karoline Jasmine Effect sprang up, dissecting not only the debate, but its deeper cultural meaning. Editorials ranged from celebratory to skeptical, but all agreed on one thing: America had just witnessed something different. Not just theater, not just outrage, but a true collision of identity, class, and power. In New Hampshire, Karoline visited a diner where the owner had put up a sign, "We're not crazy, we're citizens." A waitress shyly asked for a photo. Karoline obliged. A few tables over, an older man turned to his friend and said, "Say what you want, but she speaks plain." Meanwhile, Jasmine appeared on a late-night interview where she laughed off the chaos but got serious when asked what she'd do differently. "I'd listen more," she said, "because sometimes, even when you're right about a part, you're wrong about the tone." The host nodded. The audience did too. And in that small moment, another crack in the wall of division appeared, not wide enough to fix everything, but big enough to notice. The noise began to settle, but the reverberations remained. Political think tanks began writing memos titled The Karoline Disruption and Crockett's Cultural Crossroads. They weren't interested in style points. They were tracking sentiment, and it had shifted. Focus groups no longer responded to traditional stump speeches. They wanted confrontation, clarity, candor. What had once been considered political suicide, speaking with blunt emotional resonance, was now currency. On Capitol Hill, a bipartisan group of junior lawmakers met quietly. Unofficially, they didn't want cameras, but they did want a path forward. One aide called it the Karoline Caucus, though Karoline herself wasn't invited. What she had started couldn't be undone, but maybe it could be studied. In Texas, Jasmine held a town hall of her own. It wasn't announced with fanfare. There were no stage lights, just metal chairs, a handheld mic, and a gymnasium filled with skeptical faces. She stood without notes. "I came to listen," she said. "Not defend, not spin, just hear what I didn't before." The first few comments were polite. Then one man stood up, a retired machinist. "You don't know me," he said, "but last week you called people like me broken in the head. And you can't walk that back with a microphone, so here's your chance to prove you meant it when you said you'd listen." Silence. Jasmine stepped off the stage, sat across from him. "Tell me your story," she said. And for the next 20 minutes, no one interrupted. The video didn't go viral. It wasn't clipped for TikTok. But those who were there, they remembered. Meanwhile, Karoline visited a veterans center in Nevada. Cameras followed. Her tone had shifted too, less rhetorical, more connective. She still delivered punches, but they were fewer, heavier. "This country needs oxygen," she said, "not noise. We need air between the arguments. Space for people to be proud again without being punished for it." Donors called. Networks pitched exclusive town halls. A documentary team proposed a behind-the-scenes series. She declined most of it. "I'm not an influencer," she told her staff. "I'm not here to go viral. I'm here to be clear." And in that clarity, her power grew. By the end of the month, political analysts had stopped treating the Karoline Jasmine clash as a one-off. It was now a chapter, a fracture, a recalibration. And both women, though neither said it aloud, understood they had become more than political players. They had become cultural archetypes. The next chapter was coming, and this time neither side would be caught off guard. The pivot didn't come with a press release. It started with silent, strategic, heavy necessary. For the first time in weeks, Karoline went dark on social media. No tweets, no live streams, no interviews. The silence wasn't a retreat. It was preparation. Inside a small cabin in New Hampshire, her inner circle met for 3 days. No phones, no staff, just legal pads, black coffee, and a fireplace. The question wasn't how to ride the wave. The question was how to lead it. "What's next?" one advisor asked. Karoline stared out the window. "Next, we show them we're serious. Not just angry, not just loud, serious. Across the country, Jasmine was doing her own recalibration. Her communications director suggested a national apology tour. She refused. "If I apologize again, it'll be theater. I don't want performance, I want progress." Instead, she began building coalitions quietly, faith leaders, educators, small-town mayors. She called it the ground table. The goal wasn't headlines, it was healing. She invited Karoline. The invite was handwritten, no cameras, no speech, just a chair if she wanted it. Karoline didn't respond, but she kept the card. Meanwhile, polling firms noticed something unusual. Voters didn't just remember what the two women said, they remembered how they said it. Tone was trending higher than content. Emotion was overtaking ideology. Political consultants coined a new term, heart frame. Candidates across the country took note. Authenticity wasn't optional anymore, it was expected. At a forum in Iowa, a Senate hopeful was asked if he admired anyone outside his party. He paused, then said, "I admire Karoline Leavitt's clarity and Jasmine Crockett's conviction. They don't dodge, they stand." The crowd applauded. Journalists asked if Karoline and Jasmine were headed for a rematch. Both deflected, neither denied. But in quiet corners of campaign strategy rooms, two calendars were being marked. Same date, same stage, midterms on the horizon. They hadn't agreed to meet again, but the country had already decided. They would. Karoline returned to the spotlight with a keynote at a Midwest policy summit. Her tone was firmer, more deliberate. She no longer framed her points as rebuttals, but as declarations. Her speech opened not with a critique, but with a promise. "I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to be clear. America doesn't need performers, it needs protectors. People who speak not just for the cameras, but for the communities left behind." The room erupted, but this time the applause wasn't wild, it was grounded. Karoline stayed after the speech. She mingled with local reporters, took questions from high school students, and even joined a roundtable with state legislators, Republican and Democrat. She wasn't performing. She was planting roots. Meanwhile, Jasmine was building momentum of her own. After the success of the Unsaid, she organized a community listening tour across the South. No town was too small. At one stop in rural Alabama, she sat on a porch swing with a retired coal miner and his wife answering questions while the cicadas buzzed in the background. "This isn't damage control," she said to a local paper. "It's truth recovery. I lost the plot. I'm rewriting it with them." The authenticity was undeniable. Clips from the porch swing moment made it to national TV not because they were dramatic, but because they were real. Karoline, seeing the ripple, responded in kind. She returned to her hometown and gave a rare personal interview outside the diner where she'd waited tables as a teen. "People always ask me what changed. The truth, nothing. I just got louder." The interviewer asked about Jasmine. "I don't agree with her approach, but I think she's trying, and I'll always respect someone who's in the arena." The quote made headlines, and for the first time in months, it wasn't wrapped in hostility. Political scientists noted a drop in polarized engagement across social platforms. Instead of trading insults, people were debating ideas. Parents shared podcast episodes. Teachers assigned debate transcripts. Sermons referenced both women, not for their party lines, but for their posture. Summer was growing hotter, but the conversation somehow was cooling down. Debate organizers extended offers. Panel hosts submitted neutral sites. One was picked St. Louis, March. The nation watched. Karoline's team debated strategy. Her speechwriter proposed fire. She asked for grace. "I've shown them my strength. Now I've shown them my story." Jasmine's aides had worried about exposure. She had told them not to. "We lead by stepping in, not stepping back." The posters had gone up. The hashtags had followed. The stage had been built. But for once it wasn't spectacle driving the interest. It was substance. And in a moment when the country had grown exhausted by division, two women, who once personified the split, were now perhaps beginning to shape the bridge.